Nation comes only once in book 4. The book is about that miracle that Adam Smith was saying of a dynamic economy for the first time in human history. And he was asking what makes it go forward, what are the mechanisms? I think that evolutionary theory is meant in this classical spirit. The understanding of the dynamic driver of change, and together explain coordination, not vice versa. So it's exactly the opposite to what you study in microeconomics and macroeconomics. Anyway, more in detail, what do we want to understand? This paper that I'm going to present to you, go and see especially number 1 and number 3. Number 3 is now is published in a book edited by Malherbe and Brusoni. The origin of this list of stylized facts, micro and macro, was a meeting in Santa Fe, a top-level meeting. You had 2 or 3 Nobel Prize for Physics, you had Canaro, you had many distinguished economists. And after one day, and we were talking about dynamics, and after one day the physicist says, stop, we don't understand. Please tell us what you economists want to explain, and then we start talking again. Otherwise, we don't understand. All the economists there were bewildered by that question, saying, why do you ask that question? I mean, does not make any sense. Then only Kenneth Aura and myself went to the blackboard and started writing down stylized facts and statistical regularities that were there to be explained. This is the origin of the Dosi frame of Fabian. Well, let's start with the micro. Micro, you observe heterogeneity everywhere. You have everything except the representative agent. And you have heterogeneity at whatever level of observation and with whatever variable you look. You have, for example, heterogeneity in revealed efficiency. There is a growing evidence that not only these are the empirical densities of at 3-digit, 2-digit, of labor productivity distribution in Italy. Remember that these are logs. So it means that the ratio, say, top decile, bottom decile is something like 7:1. Long ago, I did some back-of-the-envelope calculation long ago on some data on the Brazilian industry, and it came out that were 35:1, which is in China is 30-35, reducing, but 30-35. So you have got an enormous distribution of efficiency, even given the same relative prices. So it means that, I hate to use the word production function, but if production function existed, each firm has a different production function. And these are very persistent over time. look at the autocorrelation coefficients of the relative productivity relative to the mean, and there is a very, very high autocorrelation with only a very mild reversal to the mean. You see the sign on the first differences. You have got extreme heterogeneity in technological innovation. In fact, even in developed countries, the innovators in an industry are a small percentage of all the firms in that industry. Adoption of innovation, it takes time. You say everyone knows it, yes. If you ask adoption of innovation, if you go to the bar down there and you ask, is adoption of innovation instantaneous or does it take time? Of course, they answer correctly. But you cannot give that answer in most of mainstream economics because otherwise the model blow up. So for example, you cannot have a dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model in macro if you have got time-consuming diffusion of innovation. So at the bar they get it right. In the economics classes they get it wrong. Firms are obviously heterogeneous also in terms of size. Where are they? No, we don't have size here. You have basically at all level of aggregation skewed distribution, and in the manufacturing as a whole you have more or less Pareto distribution, this power law, that is in log-log terms the cumulated distribution function is a straight line. Or if you look at not in terms of log, it has got a mass on the small with a long fat tail of large firms. Very well. You have this essay on the structure and performance of firms. You want to account for those stylized facts that I was saying before, or in any case you want to make assumptions when you go model whatever phenomena, you want to make assumptions that are not in conflict with that. For example, you want the representative agent is prohibited because the representative agent is in conflict with that notion of heterogeneity. So it is totally prohibited. What about technical change? We'll have the time to get into that later on, but let me just recall that technical change occurs through multiple trials, error, unexpected successes. That is, again, rational expectations, I think, are crazy as such. Rational technological expectations are crazy to the square power. Because, I mean, there is an almost impossibility of rational expectation about innovation, because you'd have to have rational expectation about something that you don't know yet. In fact, an innovation is something that you don't know yet, otherwise it would not be an innovation, right? There are some crazy people that say, but people have a rational expectation about something that they don't know. Say, it's like Montezuma, before the arrival of the Spaniards, had rational expectation on horses, even if he never had saw a horse. But still he had rational expectation about it. we'll see that, and we'll have a lot of time to discuss it later on or Thursday, that you have relatively structured and invariant knowledge bases that drive innovative search. What I call technological paradigms or realization are technological trajectories. And with rather infrequent discontinuities that are paradigm changes. Technical change is typically a cumulative process in which knowledge builds on pre-existing knowledge. And again, it is obvious to everyone. I mean, it is easier to take calculus 2 after having taken calculus 1 than the other way around, right? Again, economists don't like it. Why don't they like it? Because cumulativeness means dynamic increasing returns. And if you have got dynamic increasing returns, you lose convexity. And if you lose convexity, you lose the competitive equilibrium. And so this is the reason why economists don't like it. And with their typical scientific spirit, when there is some fact that contradicts the theory, instead of abandoning the theory, they abandon the fact. A good deal of technical change occurs within firms, although not all of it. In fact, the new, most dynamic technological paradigm over the last 70 years or so came from non-profit motivated research. Think of microelectronics, computing, biotechnology. The origin was outside the business sector. But it is true that a good deal of advancement, of incremental advancement, occurs within the business sector. Finally, to repeat, technological advances often entail dynamic increasing returns. The fact that the progress is cumulative is already a sign that you have got dynamic increasing return. Dynamic increasing return, in turn, since implies non-linearities, entails path dependency. That is, history counts. Where you go is also determined by where you come from and the events along the path. This on the micro. Then you have macroscopic phenomena that you would like to interpret. If you think of long history, it is since the period since the Industrial Revolution is absolutely exceptional because you have, for the first time, I write here in recorded history, even unrecorded history. Anthropologists and historians do and biologists do an excellent job in reconstructing GDP, I mean, whatever, because GDP since the Stone Age by analyzing the bones, analyzing the age, that will tell you what they ate, if they starved, etc. So, and basically, human history is flat. It has got a jump with agriculture, the introduction of agriculture, and then remain flat again. The only period of self-sustained growth is since the Industrial Revolution. And this is, you see it also from, I admire so much the historians, I mean, because the historians can put numbers upon intuition. Look at the first column, for example, 1700. And these are estimates of GDP, whatever that means, and however they got to these numbers. The idea is you had a very, very homogeneous world in terms of per capita income. I mean, Africa had 88% of the US per capita income. And then the process of industrialization by some entails an enormous increase in the variance. So that now the ratio top to bottom is 35, something like that, 40 in per capita incomes. Taking with some skepticism the actual numbers. I mean, I remember in a semi-serious paper, the great historian Cipolla, that was putting the data, putting down numbers on per capita income in various towns in Europe in the 14th century, and there was a little footnote saying, the only reliable information of this table is the name of the town. You have a lot of high variability in growth rate across country and over time. I've already said about the secular international differentiation. You have, despite that, you have some process of catching up. First of all, England catching up with the Netherlands, then Germany and the US catching up with England, and some forging ahead. Germany and the US overtake England. Then you have other episodes in which you have catching up without overtaking. Japan, for example. Later on you have Korea, now you have, even if at a long distance, China. And sometimes also bad falling behind, Argentina. Argentina in 1900 was, in terms of per capita income or whatever other indicator, near the top of the world. And it kept falling behind since. What is also interesting is that statistically you seem to have sort of clubs. You have got a multimodal distribution with a very low transition probability between the modes. So you do have positive transition probability, but they are low. The club of major innovators is even smaller than the club of frontier countries in terms of per capita income. Can you see it? No, you can't. No. In any case, I mean, you cannot see this table. Sorry. In any case, these are patents in the US, so you don't count the US because there is a home country bias. But basically, late 19th century, the major non-US patenter is the UK, followed by Germany, that is already in the process of catching up. Then all the other European countries are marginal. Even France patent much less much less than Germany, systematically. 1/3, 1/4, had almost half. And Germany remains there despite having lost 2 world wars, having had all the patents confiscated by the Allied, etc. Still, which incidentally militates in favor of a lot of cumulativeness of knowledge. Then you have, after World War II, one major entry, Japan. And later on, more recently, you have the entry of Korea and Taiwan. And now, very, very, very recently, China. You notice that Latin America is absolutely marginal. Brazil reached its peak in the 90s with 0.14%. Against, for example, Korea that was 2.54 and got in 2007 at 8.1%. And Brazil went down to 0.12. Just to give you the order of magnitude. Italy too, Italy has got a very dismal performance. Italy went, had a peak in the 70s, and then went back to 1.7. Really dismal performance. If you look at labor productivity, the same. You have the same pattern of very asymmetric distribution across countries. And remember that we are talking about the means, but the means are misleading because what we were seeing on the micro, that you have got an enormous distribution, enormously wide distribution, and in developing countries and emerging economies particularly wide. So the mean is itself misleading most often. Finally, you have uneven and painstaking international diffusion of new technologies with the significant differences across countries in their absorptive capabilities. And in fact, this is, I think, the diffusion, absorption, imitation, and the capability to absorb, I think, are a crucial issue in development theory. If you want to read more about these things, look at the book edited by Mario Cimoli, myself, and Joe Stiglitz, that is called Industrial Policies and Development. Very well. Let's look into the growth process itself. Are there invariances? What are the regularities in the growth process itself? And say in the anatomy of the capitalist machine of innovation. Well, we were saying before you have differences very wide differences in labor productivity that correlate a good deal with differences in wage rates and in per capita income. Say you find an R square, just to get an idea, you find an R square of 0.7, 0.8 in the relation between labor productivity and wage rates, and per capita income a little less. But you don't find any systematic correlation between income per head and capital output ratio, and between income per head and profit raise. Well, you know the standard story. If all countries lived on the same production function, you'd have countries that have got a high income and that they are capital abundant, they would have a very low profit rate. While countries that are capital scarce would have a very high profit rate. So you'd have the profit rate in Uganda to be much higher than that in the United States. Of course, this is not the case. The same, I mean, you'd have skilled workers paid much more in Uganda than in the US, so you'd have flows of skilled workers that migrate from the Silicon Valley to Kampala and Tebe. But apparently this is not the case, right? The fact that you don't have correlation between income per head and capital output ratio essentially tells you that you have got Harrod neutral technical progress. That you increase with technical progress, you have labor productivity that grows, capital labor ratio that grows, but also capital productivity grows. So that more or less the capital output ratio remains constant. I'm telling you, these are very rough propositions. These are very rough propositions. I mean, take the proposition that I was giving you as simply meaning you don't see any trend. There is a lot of noise. I mean, it's not, they're not precise propositions. Over time, you have secular growth in labor productivity with no evident trend in capital output ratio. Probably you had in 19th century a growth in the capital output ratio, especially in the US, associated with energy-intensive, capital-intensive paradigms. I mean, from the internal combustion engine, steel, etc., etc. But that seems to have come down with the ICT revolution. You have persistent fluctuation everywhere, that is business cycles, and also crisis, as you well know. Again, everyone knows that there are crises. Even illiterate people know that there are crises. In standard macroeconomics, you cannot have crisis. We'll see it on Thursday, but and it is intuitive. I mean, how can an economy that is summarized by one single representative agent have deep coordination failure? You would need to introduce psychiatry. The representative agent is schizophrenic. So the representative agent goes to himself and says, I want to work. And he says, no, you cannot work. So, can you lend me money? He tells to himself, no, I won't lend you money. This is the only case in which you can have crisis with the representative agent. I mean, a sort of psychiatric disorder of the representative agent. You have got co-movements in most of economic aggregates, investment, inventory, output. And again, not surprising for an economist, you have got involuntary employment of some fraction of the labor force, which is the norm rather than the exception. And in developing countries, emerging economies, you have got an almost unlimited supply of labor that lives in the traditional sector. Very well. How do you interpret this evidence? The only miraculous recipe of standard economic interpretation is build the model with microeconomic rationality and collective equilibrium. And all the things that you can interpret of the above, you interpret, which is not much, and the rest neglect. Doing, I think, a very dismal job, because of course, if you do this, it is extremely difficult to account for all the micro regularities that I was telling you before, even if people are trying to do it with some far-fetched modeling, but still, I mean, it's very complicated. Very complicated and very ad hoc. And also the macro regularities can hardly be interpreted on the ground of the standard model with, especially with representative agent, which is now the workhorse in macro. There is an alternative, I believe. I mean, I've been fighting for it and working on it for my entire academic career. That is, call it evolutionary theory. I don't care about the name. I mean, it is years that we are preparing. Sooner or later we get down to the job. A manual on that, and in my computer the notes are not evolutionary theory, but the file is called EDR, meaning economics done right, as opposed to economics done wrong. Now, what are the building blocks of evolutionary theory? Marcelo, will you come and help me in moving to the other? Because I talk about technology, but
They always need an engineer to help. That's normal.
And the engineer, I mean, is...
This one?
No.
This one?
Yes. Now, what are the major building blocks of evolutionary theory as I see them? As I see them, but as these notes were written largely together with Sid Winter, so at least Sid Winter and I see it the same way. I hope many more. The paper have been distributed, right, to the people? Yes. Okay. You will see much more of it in my introduction to the second volume of the selected essays that has been distributed. Of course, you are hotly invited to read the selected essay, but that introduction gives you an idea of the building blocks. Right? Yes, this is not so updated because the nearest to what I'm going to say is the introduction of the second volume of the selected essay, and this is the first volume. So it's the introduction. The name is very similar. It's called Economic Organization, Industrial Dynamics and Development. The second one. Well, methodology. There are few methodological prescriptions, I think, that should shape, I think, the style of analysis. I don't like very much to talk about methodology before doing any, I mean, it's like reading the Kama Sutra instead of doing the real thing. I mean, but some methodology might help. Some in parsimonious quantities might help in shaping the way you tackle the problem. As Sid Winter kept saying, a good imperative is dynamics first. That is, when you want to understand a phenomenon, when you want to understand the stylized fact that we were talking about before, a good style of interpretation is what drives them. Or if it is an organization, how did it come about? Again, you would say this is obvious. Maybe to us it is. But open randomly any journal of economics, 90% are existence theorems. An existence theorem is exactly the opposite to that. An existence theorem says, among all the words that I can conceive in a non-contradictory way, there is also this one. Nothing more. General equilibrium, you prove existence. Arrow, Hahn, Mackenzie, in their head, they were thinking that well, I start with existence and then I go to stability. And stability is a sort of rudimentary form of dynamics. Because it said, well, if I perturb that equilibrium, well, it will come back there. That is an attractive point of some process, even if I might not characterize that process. If they failed. Generically, general equilibrium is not even stable under a Varasian tâtonnement. And the Varasian tâtonnement is very, very demanding in terms of information and in terms of assumptions that you have got to make that are totally far-fetched. Because either you put the mythical auctioneer in the middle of the economy, or you need to have a lot of coherent information processing. Still is not stable, not even under the tâtonnement, general equilibrium. Demonstrated by Hahn himself. Dynamic first. Second, take seriously phenomenological evidence. Again, might be obvious. If you read Milton Friedman, 1953, Essays in Positive Economics, it's not obvious at all. Because essentially it says, I don't care about the assumption, I care about the prediction, which is a terrible epistemology, because I mean, if you care about the prediction, what is the most robust and simple model? What is tomorrow? In normal circumstances, tomorrow is today plus or minus 2%. This is the universal, if you want to make prediction, this is the universal model, more or less, apart from crisis period. And second, you want, I mean, it is ridiculous and epistemologically unfounded that you don't care about the assumption. I mean, suppose that I come to you and with the following gravitation theory. I say, well, apples can go anywhere because, in fact, apples maximize their utility. It happens that for some reason, apples enjoy very much falling down the trees with an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second. But this is just a restriction on their utility function because apples could go anywhere. And I make the restriction, and I'm very clever about that, that they fall at that speed. Of course, this theory, notice that is unfalsifiable on the original assumption. Apple maximize their utility function. You can only test or falsify the restriction. They enjoy very much falling at 9.8 meters per second. And in fact, it's verified. So it's a very good theory. It is a fantastic theory of gravitation, according to Milton Friedman. And according to many people, I mean, if you read, again, random articles, say American Economic Review, Econometrica, basically they've got that structure. They make assumptions that are totally far-fetched, and then they say the restriction is that whatever. You see, I've been so clever that the restriction is satisfied, which I think epistemologically is crazy. This comes to the delirium when you do long-term growth theory, the so-called political economy, alla Pearson, Tabellini, etc. That is, as political economy as I am anorexic. I mean, and he says, well, I want to put in the long term a production function also Protestant ethic, because Protestant ethic is a driver of growth. But then immediately you know the name of the game. Endogeneity might be endogenous. Protestant ethic might come from development, not the other way around. Then you've got to find an instrument that correlates with the right-hand side of the estimate, but not with the left-hand side. And you find that then it is open to your imagination. You find the number of Bibles sold in Sweden, in southern Sweden, in 15 whatever, against the number of Bibles sold in Naples. Giulio Bottassi, my colleague Giulio Bottassi, to tease them, has developed a very robust instrument for social trust and social capital. That is the inverse of the number of B-days. Because B-days are very diffused in Mediterranean countries where there is very little trust, and B-days practically don't exist up north. So 1 over that number is a good proxy for the, and he keeps teasing them with that, and I think he's absolutely right. Anyway, phenomenological evidence should be taken as a discipline. Well, I would add something to the dynamics and to the phenomenological evidence by saying that as you should not trust existence theorems, you should not trust either teleological explanations. What are teleological explanations? Teleological explanations are, why do we have eyes? Answer, in order to see. This is a terrible science. We might have retained eyes because they were functional in order to see. But this is not the reason why we got them in the first place. In fact, I mean, it'd be very, very handy to have wheels, but we don't have wheels. We have legs. You want to tell a story how the eyes came about. And there are biologists that have stories on evolution of things that are apparently useless for a long time, which has to do with the neutrality of equilibrium. It takes us too far, but essentially, nature produces a lot of junk that is neither harmful nor beneficial, and sometimes part of the junk turns out to be very beneficial, which is very different from an idea of nature optimizing. Anyway, evolutionary theory takes on board well the challenge of microfoundation, in the sense that the story that you wanted to tell is a story that has got to be consistent with what multiple agents do, and to some extent to why they do it. To some extent, I'll come back to some extent in a second. So, I mean, we don't, one would not go as far as, say, extreme sociological functionalism a la Talcott person, or extreme functionalism in the sense, in Marx, Althusser, in which people do what they do because they are part of a machine and they cannot do otherwise. People have different degrees of freedom, some very little, some greater. And so in the explanation has got to be consistent with what people, and I mean of course also organization, economic and non-economic organization do. This is not all, I mean, this is a good prescription, but is not a must. I have a lot of time for propositions that are not micro-founded, even if they are consistent with micro-foundation. Maybe here in Campinas you still study the multiplier and the accelerator. You're so old-fashioned that fortunately you study the multiplier and the accelerator. These are good, solid propositions that are not as such micro-founded, but establish robust regularities between, say, income and investment, or the other way around, the delta investment and income. And in fact, a good challenge on which we are working with agent-based model is trying to establish the micro-foundation of them. Propositions that have to be either micro-founded or in principle micro-foundable, even if not necessarily you want always to have things micro-founded. I mean, whatever people do, however, endemic, ubiquitous, is bounded rationality in the broadest sense. I don't like very much the word bounded rationality, because bounded rationality gives almost an idea that you have got an Olympic rationality there, and then you're bounded, and as a lot of works in behavior economics, which that part I don't like, do, say, how far is this behavior from the Olympic rationality? 1.5 meters. What is the bias of this vis-à-vis rational behavior? In fact, the point that I want to make, the point that we make for long ago, Dosi the Journal of Evolutionary Economics, 91, that you find also in the selected essays, is that in most circumstances, you are not even able to define, you as a theoretician, what is rational behavior. A case to the point is an innovative world. In a world characterized by innovation, you cannot define, even in principle, rational choice, because you cannot assign probabilities to a finite list of events, because you don't even know the events, let alone the probabilities. So in that case, even you as a theorist, you are unable to define what is rational behavior, let alone the agent. And in fact, I mean, you use heuristics. Of course, I mean, we are bounded, we are always bounded in terms of limitation on the information that we have, on the memory, on the computational capabilities. But, and this increasingly you can put in a standard model. But the boundedness is reflected by what I call competence gaps, beginning with the representation of the world. I mean, all of us, even in normal life, are, if you think about it, we are naive scientists. We try to understand causal relation in the world we live in. What makes me get the top grade in the exam of macroeconomics? Is my wife betraying me? How do I make a career? These are all questions that have to do with the identification of a causal structure in the world. Economics is bizarre, because economics, on the contrary, assume that the world is transparent, that everyone knows the true structure of the world, the true ontology of the world. And if anything, bounded rationality means for them, I don't know exactly the parameter, but I know the causal link, I know perfectly well. I've got some noise on the signal, and therefore I cannot identify precisely the parameter of this relation. While, I mean, the epistemology of us living in the world is precisely the opposite, that we try to make sense of a world that is very opaque, and science is precisely advancing on the identification of the causal structure. fact, we have been doing with Luigi Marengo and others some work in this direction. Say, having representing agent as developing models of the world and possibly evolving models of the world. More information might be worse. Recently came Giga Renzer. Giga Renzer is a great psychologist, economic psychologist from Berlin. Came to give us a fantastic seminar in Pisa on heuristics and the power of heuristics. Heuristics are essentially simple rules that on purpose neglect information and generally perform much better than models that try to exploit all information. For example, just to give you a striking example, you have a portfolio and you want to allocate allocate money in this portfolio to different assets, say there are N. What is the criterion? Sharp ratio you learn in school, mean variance. You should be suspicious, you should start being suspicious if I tell you that Sharp, that invented that, did not use it to allocate his own money. What people do and what it can be shown is more efficient is simply 1 over n. If you have got 100 euros, 100 reais, you divide by n and you allocate equally to everyone. And it can be shown that this is much more efficient than doing the other calculation. Unless, if you look at, if we are talking about shares, it can be proved if you have more than 400 years observation of the mean and the variance on these assets, then it starts, Sharp ratio starts working better. But you need 400 years on an invariant asset. So it's a bit too early now to use it. Let's wait another 399 years and then we revert to. Heuristics are everywhere. And in fact, one of the, I think, major challenges for micro research is precisely the identification of heuristics. After all, the markup in pricing is a heuristic. It's a simple heuristic. Take normal variable cost, multiply by 1 plus something. Something what? Well, something that comes from your history, from your bounded experience, that you adjust up or down according to what the market can take. Do I scrap or don't I scrap an old equipment? I use, not I mean, I don't have anything to scrap. Firms typically use a payback period rule. How long will it take for the gains in cost that the new machine brings me? How long will it take to repay the investment cost? And in fact, I mean, there's been a conjecture that, for example, the Japanese stock of equipment tend to be more up-to-date, of more recent vintages, because the Japanese have got a longer payback period. Having a longer payback period, you throw away more. Because you say, well, if there is a certain differential in productivity, even not too big, between the new and the old, but if my time horizon is 10 years, even a small difference multiplied by 10 years, okay, I throw away the equipment that I bought 5 years ago. If I've got a very short time horizon, of course I need a big gap between the current equipment and the one that I'm going to throw away. So I keep also much older vintages. The heuristic. Never met any entrepreneur using internal rate of return. Never. In fact, this is a little parenthesis, but I think relevant. I was talking to the head of the R&D department of a major German chemical company, and he was telling me, well, I've got my rules to decide to allocate the money to research. That are my gut feelings on the technological opportunity, on the difficulty in finding something, on the potential market. I said, no, I've got this bloody American pension fund on my back that are on the board, and they want to see the internal rate of return. So he says, I hire two very bright PhD in operational research, and their task is, I want the internal rate of return of these projects, make the model very complicated. This has got to have 18, this 16, this 14. Make the model very, very complicated, because I need to show it to the American pension fund. And that's the way he kept doing what he was doing, even with the American pension fund on their back. Well, we have this ontological bounded rationality that is in the interpretation of the world, and we have got a fundamental competence gap in problem solving, that is in our technologies. Or to put it in another way, we are not as omnipotent as God. And in fact, again, the story since the Industrial Revolution is a story of an enormous increase in our problem-solving capabilities, which, after all, I mean, dominating the forces of nature, the physical and chemical forces of nature, is enormously increasing our problem-solving capabilities. And again, remember what we were saying before, on the evidence, people, organization, countries differ enormously in their problem-solving abilities. And this is probably one of the also major engine, because innovation and imitation, we shall see, are one of the major engine, possibly the major engine, of advancement in industrial societies. Again, notice that you can go a long way if you equate, if you say, we'll go back to that the next lecture, but if you say knowledge is information, You can go some way. Because by saying knowledge is information, then to knowledge apply a lot of the properties of information that are indivisibility, that are sort of scale freeness in their use, etc. But knowledge is not information in the sense that it is extremely sticky and very tacit and associated to people and organization. So it is very difficult to transfer, unlike information. Otherwise, I mean, you can probably you can download from internet a manual how to make microprocessors. But still, Uganda, and not only Uganda, but also Brazil, we were talking, I have difficulties in making microprocessors, which means that it's not only information, because the information part you can download. There must be another part that is not information, and that is tacit knowledge. We shall come back to that, but let's remember it. This is a fundamental ingredient, a fundamental building block of the interpretation of economic change. Finally, preferences, that is, and with that also motivations, are totally endogenous. This is exactly the opposite to what you read in the books. I mean, you say individuals are characterized by a utility function, they maximize over the utility function. Can you tell me what is your utility function? Can you formalize it? Or even your preferences. I knew only one that did that, but was out of his mind. Rife, the game theorist from Harvard, that had on his computer tried to formalize his own utility function. So you'd ask him, shall we go to dinner tomorrow? And you would impute dinner tomorrow, and you'd say, no, my utility function says that I don't come to dinner. But we are near psychiatry. Again, typically our preferences come exposed, come after the fact. With my students, to illustrate it so they remember it, I recall a song from the 60s that says, if you cannot be with the one you love the one you are with. Which is the preferences that comes after the state, which is, of course, exactly the opposite to what the theory would prescribe. There are quantity of experiments on that. I mean, there is a famous classical experiment in which I say you take two group of people, say at the University of Sussex, where I got my PhD, and you say, go to the canteen of the University of Sussex. The canteen at the University of Sussex is cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, it's a violation of human rights, the canteen of that university. And then you pay, one group you pay very little. The other group you pay significant amount simply to go and eat at the canteen of the University of Sussex. And then you ask them, do you like it? Did you like it? Now, what is the answer? Of course, the two groups answer differently. Those that were well paid, what do they answer? Sorry? They don't like it. Because they can be truthful. In any case, I mean, I ate shit, but I was paid. So The others that were basically not paid, they've got to make sense of the fact that we're paid little and went to eat shit. And so they say, I like it. They said, no, not bad. Which is, I mean, exactly the opposite to what you'd consider utility maximization, but is endogenous formation of preferences. Again, this is a domain that is very important to study. Basically, none of us does. We should do it more. Also because this links with political science, because it has got to do with adaptation, social conformity, docility, submission, or revolt. And we should do it more together with the social psychologists and political scientists, if there are some political scientists left. That is, some political scientists that are not Chicago economists in disguise. They are sociologists. Genuine political scientists are a species that should be protected like the pandas, I think. Heterogeneity. Well, heterogeneity, we talked about it. That is to say, you want to have models and interpretations that respect the evidence that we were talking about before, and allow for, obviously, heterogeneity in preference and endowments, but this is also in the standard theory. In general equilibrium, you have it. But also heterogeneity in the models of the world, in the problem-solving repertoires that is in the technology that they master, and possibly in learning mechanisms. Why did I put a question mark? Because we know very little about learning mechanisms. And in fact, the only way we know that, the only thing that we know is that people do not learn the way economists attribute them to learning. That is, they're not learning in a Bayesian way. There is some evidence from, I think it was years and years ago, on the Journal of Abnormal Psychology, and he was showing that people that vaguely are Bayesian are seriously autistic people. These are the only people that are Bayesian. Why? Because a very autistic person keeps all the prior in mind, is unable to learn by deleting option and deleting category and building categories. So the seriously autistic people tend to look like economists. But no one else. The other side of all this is that there is the persistent emergence of novelty. That is, you have got in modern economies and societies, you have got the persistent emergence of technological, organizational, and behavioral innovation. And in fact, a good deal of our theorizing and of our empirical analysis, our meaning as evolutionary inclined people, is precisely trying to understand how these novelties come about. and we'll see later on how they do. How am I doing with time? What time is it? 4. We can do another half an hour. Well, this is, say, the building blocks characterizing individuals, and even more so characterizing organizations. Well, we get there in a second, but organization should not be seen as bundles of contracts among individuals. But organizations are entities with a life of their own, which to some extent shape individuals, but we shall come back to that. In any case, these entities, being them individuals, being them organizations, operate in an interactive environment. This interactive environment, in turn, operate also as a selection mechanisms. Competition is, to a good extent, a selective mechanism. And a related question mark is, how does it work? And how can you also formalize it? Again, I mean, we know very little about how markets work. I mean, economists continue to talk about markets, but they don't know a fuck all about how the markets work. Serious detailed study that I know on how markets work have been done by Alan Kerman on the fish market. I know some work on strawberry, a lot on fish, some on strawberry, yes, and some other perishable commodities, but that is basically it for a discipline that every other word has got the word market. If you think about it, it's dramatic. And how do markets work, of course, means what people do to whom, under what circumstances, and what is the outcome. And for example, if you, in the work by Alan Kerman, you see that individuals on the fish market during the day do not even have a well-behaved demand curve. Often they have a U-shaped demand curve. And that whenever you see in the market a well-behaved demand curve, this is an effect of aggregation, while the individuals do not even respect what you study in Economics 101 the second day, or the first day. On the side of formalization, there's been attempts we are doing with Marcel and Marika, now a model in that respect, trying to account for the properties of industry, size distribution, etc., on the ground of replicator dynamics, that is, on the ground of processes by which firms are selected as a function of their differential competitiveness, or efficiency or whatever. Knowing how markets work would help also in understanding what are the dimensions over which competition occurs. And we know very little about that. Very well. And again, I mean, this is a challenge for you that you are young and beautiful to study these things. Basically, the story that that I've told you so far is a story of heterogeneity, bounded rationality written large, learning, and interaction with some selection. The general claim that I would suggest is that all the aggregate regularities that we were talking about before are an emergent property of the above. That is, learning, out of equilibrium interaction, imperfect selection. What is an emergent property? Emergent property are properties of some aggregate description of the system which cannot be imputed to the intentional behavior of any one agent or collection of them, but rather partly, not unilateral, sorry, but the unintentional outcomes of far from equilibrium learning, adjustment, and selection. So take GDP growth. GDP growth in log terms is a fluctuating line, right? There are two opposite explanations there. One is why do you have the growth? Because you have got exogenous shocks. The exogenous shock, technological shocks, are stochastic. You have a representative agent that optimally adjusts to these shocks and does some smoothing. And this is the outcome, what you observe there is the outcome of that optimal adjustment by the representative agent. What we say is exactly the opposite, saying dysregularity, growth with fluctuation, is the outcome of many heterogeneous agents that learn, make mistakes, some survive, some don't, interact with each other, compete, etc. The outcome of both processes of learning and selection and adaptation, etc., is that, and is robustly that. This is important because it is easy to make any silly model for one single phenomena. You have got to have models that are robust to parameterizations, to different parameterization, and that explain many stylized facts at the same time. For example, I repeat it for the nth time, the representative agent is inconsistent with the heterogeneity that we were talking about before. You would like to have, on the contrary, a macro model that is able to account not only for growth with fluctuation, but also for the co-movements of the variable GDP, consumption, investment, etc. that is able to account also for deep crisis, that is able to account for the persistence of unemployment. And we shall see on Thursday that agent-based models, well done, not all agent-based models, but well done agent-based models are able to do that. Agent-based models are essentially models with populated by multiple heterogeneous agents that interact with each other without any commitment to equilibrium. A big challenge ahead is the emergence and self-maintenance of organization, form, and institution. We know not too much about how organizations work. In fact, we don't know too much. I mean, we don't know too much because most of the discipline has tried to interpret organizations as optimal contracts, bundle of optimal contracts, the agency theory. And even transaction cost economics has sort of black boxed the organization as such, saying organization is a mechanism of whatever kind that controls transaction costs in presence of potentially opportunistic behavior. But what happens within the organization, there are the classical studies by March and Simon, Sayert, but organizational research has not progressed very much since. And I think this is a major challenge for us. Again, you are young and beautiful, you can do it. But repeating studies like the beautiful Sayert and March, reconstructing qualitatively and formalizing how this organization, if I remember well, the supermarket worked, was a fantastic enterprise because involved the reconstruction also of all the heuristics and routines associated with the various operations. Yeah, there is vibrant research on organizational routines. Organizational routines, it goes in that direction. Evolutionary processes are institutionally embedded, in the sense that are embedded into often more inertial and resilient institutions that are states, that are firm themselves, and are related to university research, the political process, government agencies. Not much work has been done on this embeddedness. Dick Nelson and colleagues have done a lot in analyzing national system of innovation. As such, looking at the embeddedness of the processes of innovation by country and by sector, like Franco Malherbe and colleagues did. Much less work has gone into the analysis of the embeddedness, the institutional embeddedness, for example, of the labor market. People of the French regulation school have done something. But there's been little dialogue between the regulation school and the evolutionary theorizing. A crucial issue is one of coevolution. How how technology co-evolve, we know something, not much, but we know something. How technology and institution co-evolve, we know much less. So, for example, how the new ICT-based forms of production co-evolves with the organization of the firm on the shop floor and the organization of the labor market, that we know very little. And this is crucial, on the contrary, to understand what happened in the impact of new technologies on labor relations, etc. Coevolution, I cannot refrain myself from. Coevolution, of course, is the contrary to the economist's obsession of identification. Because in the economist's obsession of identification, you want to know the cause, what causes what, and then you want to plug it in an estimate. And maybe take out also the elasticity. What is the elasticity of GDP to the Protestant ethic, or whatever? Coevolution is not being structurally able to identify causes. It is, when I tease the identification, people say, go to a biologist and ask whether it is the gazelle that causes the lion or the lion that causes the gazelle. Say, you are drunk. But economists try to identify whether the gazelle causes the lion or vice versa. In fact, this is in parentheses into parentheses, I think that there is a major challenge ahead also on the econometric instruments, because a good deal of econometrics is predicated on equilibria that are shocked, but you go back there. And in world in which you have got multiple paths and coevolution, you might want a total. I'm not an econometrician, so I'm not going to say anything about that. I can flag my uneasiness with the current state of econometrics, even if I am unable to suggest anything as an alternative. But I think this is urgent. At the very least, yes, there is a little bit co-integration is the nearest that you get to coevolution. It's poor, but you don't you're not asked to identify any causal mechanism. You simply say, well, these things go robustly together. Then there is a problem when this co-integration is non-linear, of course, as in most economic phenomena. Another issue is time scale. Time scale that is an issue in qualitative interpretation of economic phenomena, and is even more so an issue of when you go to model, because the speed of adjustment, the speed of change of different variables typically influence the dynamics. Again, we know very little on that. Also not helped by the fact that if you assume that you are in equilibrium, you don't need to investigate any time scale. If you are not in equilibrium, then what is the speed of adjustment of, say, market share to different what is the speed of adjustment of investment, even on prices, as compared to the other area. This is, we have microdata, statistical microdata. We don't have, we would need field research to investigate the actual time sequences of decision. Again, I mean, our colleague from management should do that instead of other things. But often they do not. Well, some qualifications. The word I'm talking about, we are talking about, are typically stochastic. You have got stochastic events that come along. Stochasticity alone does not qualify for evolution, though. Evolution, in the evolutionary world that I have in mind, you have got a continuous emergence of novelties, technological, behavior, organizational novelties along the path. Evolution typically entails nonlinearity, but nonlinearity is not sufficient to qualify for evolution. If tonight you go home and you cook some spaghetti, you have a very nonlinear process because you've got, in fact, you've got a three-phase transition from the cold water to irregular bubbles coming up to an ordered convection of the bubbles to the boiling water. So, in fact, you've got four states in the system. Still, so it's very nonlinear. Still, you don't say, I go home and I evolve my spaghetti, right? Because evolution means something more. That, say, if the spaghetti were not there at the beginning and are there at the end, that you could say, I evolved my spaghetti. But the spaghetti are there, you cook them, and you don't say that you evolved them. Again, because you don't have novelties along the process. There is, in what I said, there is no commitment to Darwinian blind mutation. In fact, what we shall be talking about next time, the existence of paradigms, trajectory, etc., gives order to the arrival of novelty. So it's not blind at all. I mean, it's full of uncertainty, yes, but it's not blind. You have a lot of order and directedness in the process of search that apparently you don't have in natural in natural evolution. Well, in the grand scheme of things, I think you have a few level of description and few level of analysis. You have, say, you have got a level 0 that are the sort of cognitive and behavioral foundation, the nature of knowledge, the learning process, the development of routines, how preferences come about. You have, say, a level 1 that goes from that are from the micro-foundation, I write there, to the phenomenological description of the agent. That is, you could say, the micro-foundation as the phenomenological description of the agent. What agent actually do? Markups, paybacks, R&D propensities, propensity to consume, whatever. You've got the interpretation of meso and macro aggregates as emergent properties in the definition that we were giving before. At the meso level, size distribution of firms, processes of firm growth, something that was not in the list of stylized facts that I was telling you, but it's puzzling and is an important, as we write, as an important footprint of evolution is the fact that the process of growth of firms is Laplace distributed. In log-log terms, is a tenth. Why? Because the process of competition entails correlation. It's a long story, but if you want, and this is why it's not normally distributed. If it were normally distributed, it would not be a tenth. So that phenomenon itself, that you could say is minor, no, it's not minor, because it's a precious clue on the fact that growth comes from a process of learning and competition. If it were not from a process of learning and competition, but were the outcome of addition of independent little shocks, it would be normally distributed, which is not. You can find a discussion of, a little discussion of that in the statistical regularities paper of the previous presentation. And you find one interpretation. Bottassi Secchi, Rand Journal of Economics, 2006. And hopefully you'll have another interpretation that Marcel and Marek are putting forward in these days. And in a month's time or so, you'll see a working paper coming up. This is just, if you want, an extreme illustration that there are some statistical regularities that tell a lot about the underlying generating processes. Another claim is that precisely the statistical property of macro are robustly generated by an evolutionary process. We'll see that at use next time when we'll discuss, use an agent-based model to discuss the effect of austerity, like the one that the crazy Germans are imposing on Europe and that you are going to face with your Minister of the Economy that you have now. The effect that has on growth, that are disastrous. But we'll use the agent-based model to experiment the effect of policies. You have the level of, say, coevolution, institutional embedded level of economic change. And finally, I mean, if you want to end with the grand fourth movement of a Beethoven symphony, this might be this type of interpretation might be the ground of grand historical conjecture on the pattern of change of capitalism. But this is, of course, well beyond the modeling exercises, but it's about, as Hicks was saying, a sort of theory of history, the political economy of capitalism. I would end here. I think I've overwhelmed you with a lot of things. I'd leave the rest for discussion, and I hope that there is going to be discussion. Pode falar em português, hein? Pode falar em português.
Temos tempinho para questões ou não?
Sim, sim.
Sim. Então bom, agradeço muito aqui a apresentação do professor. Temos ainda um tempo para questões de vocês. Podem fazer as questões em português.
Freewheeling, assim, sem medo.
Ali temos uma... Eu acho que eu vou pedir isso, por favor. Obrigado.
Ou se não, poderia passar.
Isso aqui, né?
É isso aqui.
Fico mais à vontade.
Sim.
Boa tarde, professor. Meu nome é Tiago, sou aluno do mestrado e gostaria de levantar uma questão. Você falou ao longo de toda a sua palestra sobre o desenvolvimento e eu queria perguntar para o senhor como o senhor percebe o seguinte elemento. O desenvolvimento econômico, com taxas altas de crescimento de produtividade e com alto grau de inovação, é um fenômeno basicamente do capitalismo e do desenvolvimento do capital. Como você percebe a cointegração entre o capital e o desenvolvimento das instituições e da tecnologia, como processo do desenvolvimento capitalista? E essa aqui é uma pergunta muito ampla, mas um segundo ponto que eu queria colocar como você observa o desenvolvimento micro, né, do aspecto tecnológico e como, por exemplo, certas políticas macro possibilitaram o desenvolvimento de certos países, como você citou o caso do Japão, atualmente o caso da China. Então, como esse elemento capital com o elemento tecnologia, como eles se casam? Assim, é extremamente amplo, mas é mais ou menos isso. Obrigado.
Respondo?
Pode ir primeiro? Alguém mais quer fazer já uma questão? Porque daí já podemos fazer um... Pode responder.
E depois vamos a...
Ok, perfeito.
So, I believe that, yes, capitalist development is intimately associated with technological change. It is not the only factor, but certainly it is a necessary condition and possibly the core driver. Marx was very clear about that. I mean, saying capitalism is the only system that has put technical change at the center of its own dynamics. Now, I think that the question was indirectly hinting at how do late-coming countries trigger the process? And this is a very difficult question. Certainly, as we claim in the book edited by Cimoli, myself, and Stiglitz, necessary conditions for that are policies. You don't have any single example of late industrialization without an array of policies that affect what? First of all, they affect the accumulation of capabilities. But capabilities are not accumulated in the air. Capabilities are typically accumulated in organizations, in firms. Policies nurture firms. And sometimes create them. In order to nurture firms, you need to create a vacuum, to protect them a bit or a lot, because otherwise they don't grow. I mean, you cannot put send Schwarzenegger in a kindergarten. Schwarzenegger, if he wants, he kills all the children. There is no competition there. I find that the WTO agreement make development of catching up country more difficult because they tend to curb the form of infant industry protection that are necessary to nurture a domestic industry. These are necessary conditions. Then the story of Latin America successes and failures tell us that this is not sufficient, that you have got to actively intervene. It's not that if you erect walls, then firms will be born like mushrooms. You need to intervene directly at the micro level, and equally important, prevent rent-seeking behavior, which the Japanese did and the Korean did very well behind their walls, and the South American did very badly. That is, having a developmental state that transfers the rents to the dynamic actors and against the rent seekers, which has been done very well in Korea, in Japan, and was not done here. For example, in Korea, you are saying, well, I'm going to protect you, and I'm going even to give you dollars that are a scarce resource to buy machine tools abroad, to establish your business, but you have got to give me back the dollars in terms of export after X period. If not, you will not have the dollars any longer, or worse, some went to jail, which is and some were shot. Some were also shot. So I mean, it's a very convincing. These are very convincing mechanisms that makes incentive compatible the behavior. All the processes of development have occurred in an anti-intellectual property right mode. The catching up countries were violating intellectual property rights, beginning with the United States. The United States for 50 years did not recognize foreign patents. And even after, they recognized foreign patents only if they were taken up first in the United States and then at home. That was a powerful mechanism, of course, of technology transfer. I find the fact that emerging economies discuss in positive ways intellectual property protection as an incentive to development, I find it totally crazy. I was a couple of years ago, 3 years ago in Uruguay, and there were people seriously debating how could we strengthen property right in order to stimulate innovation in Uruguay. You've got to be joking. You stimulate innovation by allowing easier imitation and therefore by tearing down intellectual property right. Avoid, well, there is another book on that. It is a Cimoli, Dosi, Stiglitz, and several others that is called Intellectual Property Right and Development, that came out a year ago or so. A suggestion that we give, we know that it's controversial, is avoid the natural resources curse. Natural resources are often a curse, a malediction. They are not a benefit, especially natural resources that are mineral and oil. They tend to be concentrated, associated with low domestic skills, high rent seeking, corruption, and subject to enormous international fluctuation in prices. The episodes in which natural resources were put to work positively are very rare and generally associated with countries that were already industrialized, Norway. Most other countries, natural resources have been a curse. Even in Brazil, to my understanding, the boom in primary commodities has induced an early deindustrialization of the Brazilian economy. The Dutch disease is everywhere. I mean, the Dutch disease, as you know, was a word invented in the 60s. The Dutch had a lot of gas. The gas we identify basically in all episodes of industrialization. There is, and this answers the second question, there must be a consistency between this policy and macro policies. Of course, if you have a macro policy that is so restrictive, Washington consensus type, that brings the real interest rate we were discussing yesterday at dinner, the dinner in honor of Maria de Conceição Tavares. If you have macro policies that bring the real interest rate at 15%, of course, you can only invest in cocaine and prostitution that give you more than 15%. So you need a consistency between the macro that you have, and in fact, I mean, given the Argentinian policy for 30 years, no one would have survived, with very few exceptions, even in presence of industrial policy. And I know of one firm that survived, Techint, but not many more in Argentina, given the policy since the late 70s, Martinez de Oz, all the way to Menem. And this is a recurrent issue in Latin America, because apparently there is a systematic inconsistency between the macro management and the industrial policy desiderata. To my understanding, that characterized also the Lula government and the Dilma government. Well, you're experts of Japan, of Brazil.
Boa tarde, Rosana Coraza. Sou professora na Facamp, mas agora serei professora também no Departamento de Política Científica e Tecnológica. Obrigada pela aula. O senhor terminou a apresentação com os níveis de análise, os níveis de investigação. E agora, na sua fala, mencionou o problema dos possíveis obstáculos que se pode ter quando se tem o desafio de lidar com uma riqueza que pode ser uma maldição, no caso da maldição dos recursos naturais. E, bom, eu começo a perceber um interesse dos alunos, e meu próprio, de pensar em mudanças de longo prazo. Seria o quarto nível de análise que o senhor propõe. Nesse momento que a gente vê no mercado mundial a queda de preços do petróleo e o fundo norueguês, que talvez a Noruega seja o contra-exemplo da maldição dos recursos naturais, como o senhor sugeriria, que pistas o senhor daria para os jovens investigadores que quisessem se aventurar por esse nível 4? Como pensar em grandes conjecturas históricas de padrões amplos de mudança do capitalismo? Obrigada.
Rewriting Karl Marx and more. No, I think that a good way of thinking the long period is thinking of in terms of sort of combinatorics. This is a teaching that comes from Chris Freeman, a great maître à penser, has emphasized it more than once. You have a necessary combinatorics between, say, the scientific and technological domain, one, the institutional, organizational domain, embedding labor markets, commodity markets, embedding the production of new knowledge outside firms. And third, you have got forms of political governance, the legal setup, and different phases of capitalism, or different variety of capitalism, embody different combination of these. I think some phases are clear. Say the Fordist form of capitalism with a good deal of knowledge generation outside of the business sector and associated with the major military space program in the US. What Mariana Mazzucato calls the big mission-oriented programs. And then you had production with organized labor, with wages linked to productivity, relatively egalitarian income distribution, durable goods for mass consumption that were driving demand, and all kept together, and say, broadly speaking, social democratic policies, both at macro level. In the US, you'd not call social democratic policies, but they were social democratic policies. New Deal. I mean, General Eisenhower was almost a socialist. I mean, when I go to the States to talk about the crisis, etc., my final mantra is, I asked them, but do you know that you had the communist president? They look at me and say, what? I say, yes, General Dwight Eisenhower. He had the marginal taxation of income at 92% and the taxation of profit at 62%. Long live Comrade Eisenhower. And people, in fact, I gave this speech once at the Navy, at the school of the U.S. Navy, and I thought I was going to be killed. And everyone on the contrary liked it a lot. And that was a setup. Do we see other setups in the developed world? I don't see it. I don't see it. I see the need of, say, a sort of revamped Keynesianism, innovation-friendly, environment-friendly Keynesianism. In order to do that, we need to protect ourselves. We need to protect ourselves because the Chinese are not going to pay my pension. This for sure. And if someone believes that the Chinese workers that don't have the pension themselves will come to pay mine, they're out of their fucking mind. And this, I think, some protection would be good also for the Chinese workers, because China will at the end have to reflate internally. Chinese development is a monster because it's a continent that has an export-led industrialization. The US, when they industrialized, their export propensity was 4%. Chinese export propensity is 45 or something like that. So it's totally unviable. In fact, I believe that also countries like South American countries, especially of the size of Brazil, have to protect, in order to reindustrialize, have to protect themselves. Because Brazil is an extremely high-wage country compared to China. Even African countries are high-wage because unit labor costs are wages divided by productivity. African countries have typically wages that are, say, half of the Chinese one, but productivity that is 1/10 of the Chinese one. So they are a high-wage country. And in fact, the textile industry has disappeared in all Western Africa. I think that in the medium term, any development of other countries outside the Far East without some form of protection is really difficult to imagine. This has got to be associated with a political economy. You're right, who are the actors that do that? Certainly I know who are not: finance and the bankers. And finance and the bankers, on the contrary, have got an overwhelming power everywhere. If one does not curb significantly the power of finance, cut their wings, it's very difficult to imagine any sustained pattern of growth, neither in developed countries nor in emerging economies like Brazil. How do you curb bankers? Well, an objective curbing would come by a Spanish or Italian default. I tend to advocate it. I mean, it's not. I don't call it default, because default is a bad word. Reprofiling of the debt. Reprofiling is like the old lady that goes to the surgeon, to the aesthetic surgeon. So reprofiling is nice. So I'm all for reprofiling of the reprofiling of a debt like the Italian one would induce a major shaking in the international financial system. Even the Spanish, I mean. In any case, I cannot think of a sustained process of international growth with these balances of power between finance and the real economy. I think it's a problem in Europe, it's a problem in Latin America, in Brazil, I mean, to levels that up till 30 years ago, I think was unimaginable. I mean, if someone told me 30 years ago that you had the revolving door between Wall Street and the Treasury, and the US Treasury, people coming back and forth, Rubin, the Rubinite, etc., I would have said, no, this is vulgar Marxism, is Lenin 101, this might apply to Nicaragua, but not to the United States. It applies to the United States. It's not an answer to the question, but are some freewheeling thought about it.
A questão que eu queria te colocar é sobre um tema bem específico, que em parte da sua apresentação você tratou, mas muito rapidamente, que é sobre preços na teoria. E como na teoria você não tem uma discussão sobre monetária propriamente, ou como entra não quero falar face monetária, mas como se articula monetariamente, né, a teoria, né, ou em termos monetários a teoria, mas a minha questão é mais específica do que isso. Quando a gente olha preços, e você pega preços ao longo do tempo, eles são muito melhor descritos como um passeio aleatório do que qualquer regularidade identificável no comportamento dos preços. Em algum momento, você tratou de uma forma de tratar a questão dos preços por meio de cointegração, que te daria, não regras, mas alguma regularidade, não da própria variável, do próprio preço, mas de pares ou conjuntos de variáveis que você pudesse tratar de maneira cointegrada, né? Tendo isso por referência, a minha pergunta é a seguinte: a hipótese clássica, em algum momento necessária, de markups e markups estáveis ou fixos, ela permanece como uma hipótese analítica válida, dado este conceito de interdependência, interrelacionalidade, novidades, e como é que você trata essa questão?
I would make a major distinction between prices of manufacturers and generally goods that are produced under condition of non-decreasing returns and the rest. In manufacture and generally goods produced under non-decreasing returns, generally increasing returns, I think that the assumption of markup pricing on markup on the cost of production is still a reasonable one. And in fact, I mean, prices move in line with the productivity, basically, in industrial production. Primary commodity is different. Primary commodity is different. Are they a random walk or not? They have a long-term cyclical component inside. So they have some significant autocorrelation structure there. I'm not an expert of that, to ask, do they co-move, for example? Are they co-integrated? All primary commodities, agricultural primary commodities, do they co-move? Seems to me that they do, that you're right. Again, I'm not an expert. Chatham House has collected very nice data on primary commodity prices. One thing that I'm asking the question, but I don't know the answer, and I'd like to know more. What is the role of speculation in driving these prices? Which is also reflected in another question. What is the relation between the price, say, on the commodity exchange in Chicago and the actual price at which, say, firms buy copper or buy aluminium? This is something that I really don't know. But the punchline that I would like to underline is distinguish primary commodities and things that are reproducible in the short term under condition of non-decreasing returns.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Wagner Madeira, eu sou aluno da pós aqui. O senhor mencionou sobre a possibilidade de reindustrialização de países periféricos, falando explicitamente de que seria necessário proteção para isso, de barreiras. Falou também da Mariana Mazzucato, sobre o livro recente dela. Pelo menos na minha leitura, um ponto principal da argumentação da Mariana é que o Estado é um bom inovador, que os empreendedores ficariam no papel um pouco mais secundário ou nas partes mais fáceis da inovação. Queria saber se o senhor concorda com isso, se tem elementos analíticos ou de simulação que corroborem essa afirmação.
Well, the state is a good innovator in some areas and some states. The U.S. state has been a very good innovator. Especially in military aerospace, but with fallouts that went well beyond military and aerospace. This is not to mean that the U.S. government say, I make the computer because the computer will change the life of the people, etc., etc. No, I make the computer because I need to make calculation for the bomb, etc., etc. Not the. Now, there are other states that are bad, and I would not rely on them so much as innovators. I mean, as things stand now, for example, I mean, I find it difficult to apply Mariana recipe to Italy. The state is not such a great innovator. Used to be, mind you. The Italian state-owned enterprises were jewels of technological accumulation. and was a stock of knowledge that was totally depleted in the early 90s by selling off for few dirty money immediately. The state as innovator in emerging economies, the state can be usefully foster jointly with the private sector when the private sector is there. Also the state as imitator. Look at the Chinese experience. The Chinese experience, you had a lot of state-owned enterprises that became joint venture between the state and private capital. Private capital, maybe the private was the son of the head of the Communist Party. The boundary between public and private are not so, but you had enormous successes. Huawei, for example, in computing system and telecom, and there the state obviously played a major role. And in fact, my conjecture that is corroborated by people that know the story of China better than I do, a lot of capabilities that then were put to use, were released under the Deng Xiaoping period, were those that were accumulated under the central planning period. I mean, you don't form the engineer in 2 years. The engineers that went to work for the electronic companies, this joint venture, were the same engineers that were trained under central planning. So the state can play and should play a major role also in catching up. But in catching up means then maybe directly participating to the construction, emergence, strengthening of private-public joint ventures that get patient money. Here you have got the BNDES that is a jewel and can offer patient money. And this, I think, is a major ingredient of a process of reindustrialization. Of course, again, if you do that, but then you do a macro policy that is crazy monetarism, the two things don't go together. You need a part of the public administration that is competent and not to corrupt. BNDES, to my knowledge, is competent and not corrupt, and so can do that job. In countries like Italy, you'd have to reconstruct institutional bodies that do that, because you don't have any longer the technician, the capability that, for example, you had in state-owned enterprises and that were dissolved. In the US, you have and you continue to have it, and the US don't talk about industrial policy, but with their usual pragmatism, they practice industrial policy, and they do it a lot. They have a nanotechnology plan, they give money to photovoltaic, some with success, some with failure, but you cannot blame, I mean, in a certain business, you can say, you have put the money in that firm that failed. Yes, it's part of the innovation business. The US government supported Tesla, electrical cars, etc. They have, and they have the apparatus to do that. DARPA, but not only DARPA. DARPA, as you know, is the Pentagon applied research arm that sponsor also dual-use technology, so technology that might have civilian application, not only military application. And something that people don't know. Who is the biggest venture capitalist in the US? Do you know who is the biggest venture capitalist in the US? The US federal government. The US federal government is by far, is bigger as a venture capitalist, is bigger than the rest of the venture capitalists. And nobody talks about it. Venture capital seems that it is the Wild West. No, it's not the Wild West. It's the federal government.
Mais questões? Vocês têm alguma questão a mais? Então, então acho que encerramos por hoje. Agradeço muito a presença de vocês, agradeço demais a presença do professor Giovanni Dosi e continuamos então na quinta-feira. Até lá.